Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bhattacharya, I have a question for you. First of all, thank you very much for the Great Barrington Declaration. I remember vividly the first time I read that. You know, I'd had my own doubts about the government's reaction, but I read that and I thought, thank goodness other people agree with me. So it was a very courageous thing to have done. Here's the question. So, you know, we've been having this discussion about the censorship that you endured as a result of that, and particularly at the time, the fact that the government agencies, multiple government agencies, played an active role in suppressing that point of view. So here's the question. If you ask those agencies at the time why they were pushing back, their response would have been, well, there's a public health interest in doing this, right? It's like, you know, if you had people advocating for jumping off a cliff and young people were actually jumping off a cliff, you know, many government agencies would say, you know, whoa, you can't say that because people are following the advice and it's bad advice. And, you know, the Supreme Court, when we're talking about this First Amendment right that we have in the debate over free speech, the Supreme Court has said, you know, with a famous example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So can you talk about why government agencies pushing back on your declaration was not the equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theater?
Thank you for that, Congressman. So a couple of things. One is that the declaration itself represented a century of pandemic management. We were just restating how we managed pandemics in the past, respiratory virus pandemics in the past, successfully. So it wasn't, in that sense, fringe at all. Second, and this is probably more to the heart of your question, if public health, if someone's in public health, a Stanford professor stands up and says smoking is good for you, I'm violating an ethical norm to accurately reflect what the scientific evidence actually says. I'm harming the public by doing that. If I stand up and say something that is part of an active scientific discussion, how best to manage a pandemic, that's what I'm supposed to do as a professor. That's my job as a person in public health. And then to have that suppressed, well, that itself was unethical. It was an abuse of power by the federal government, in particular by Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, who have the ability to fund scientists, who make the careers of scientists, to put their fingers on the scale. And that's why I think what you said doesn't actually apply in this case.
Sure. Well, and you made the point in your testimony that lack of scientific consensus should have been a red flag, which I agree with. In fact, I was working on my own doctorate at the time, and I looked at the evidence that was produced and thought that the lack of scientific rigor was just astonishing. You know, but by the same token, if that's the bar, you know, if consensus is the bar, we're never going to get there because even if you yelled, you know, fire in a public theater, there'd be some scientist somewhere saying, well, actually, technically it's not fire, it's a chemically induced combustion reaction. You know what I mean? So I think that if we're going to criticize the government's reaction, which I think is totally justifiable, we also need to come up with constructive solutions to how to handle this in the future, because, you know, certainly we all agree that there is a public health interest that government agencies are supposed to promote. But I'd love to continue the discussion.